said to be that the Book of Judith contained truths that readers of the Bible couldn't handle, truths that might render the book unholy. But what were these truths, and why were they deemed unfit for canonization? Let's dive a little deeper into the shocking contents of this book. For 2,000 years, Jews and Christians have often mentioned Queen Esther and the widow Judith together. For those unfamiliar, the Book of Esther and the Book of Judith are quite similar, but only Esther is included in the Bible. Esther, found in the Old Testament, tells the story of a Jewish woman who becomes the Queen of Persia. While living in the king's palace, she discovers a plan to kill and plunder her fellow Jews. Through a clever and daring strategy, she manages to thwart the plot and save her people. It's understandable why. They're both celebrated Jewish heroines featured in popular biblical books named after them. Both women were known for their beauty, resourcefulness, and bravery, and their stories are among the most captivating and well-written in the Bible. However, the two books have had very different outcomes. The Book of Esther was canonized and is considered sacred scripture by both Jews and Christians. In contrast, the Book of Judith is non-canonical and apocryphal for Jews and Protestants, and considered deuterocanonical for Roman Catholics. It's especially puzzling that Jews accepted the Book of Esther but rejected the Book of Judith, given that Judith is clearly a religious book, whereas Esther, at least on the surface, is not. Remarkably, God is not mentioned at all in the Book of Esther, a distinction it shares only with the Song of Songs in the entire Hebrew Bible. The Book of Esther also lacks prominent Jewish themes and institutions such as the covenant, the law, prayer, the temple, sacrifice, and dietary laws. In contrast, the Book of Judith is deeply embedded with these religious beliefs and practices and presents them in an orthodox manner. So why was the Orthodox Book of Judith excluded from the Jewish canon? One theory suggests that the Book of Judith contains too many errors, while other, more subtle flaws might have also contributed to its exclusion. The book, which is only 16 chapters long, can be divided into two sections, the prelude and the action. The prelude begins with King Nebuchadnezzar of the Assyrians, who in the 12th year of his reign leaves his capital Nineveh to wage war against the great Median king Arphaxad. Various Mesopotamian people ally with Nebuchadnezzar. However, Western countries not only refuse his invitation to join the campaign, but also treat his envoys with contempt, leading Nebuchadnezzar to vow vengeance against them. Despite the refusals of aid, Nebuchadnezzar defeated Arphaxad and destroyed his supposedly invulnerable city of Ecbatana 5 years later. Now, ready to exact his revenge on the Western nations, Nebuchadnezzar commissions his best general, Holofernes, to crush their rebellious spirit. What happens next is shocking. With an army of 120,000 infantry and 12,000 cavalry, Holofernes sets out and quickly succeeds. Some nations surrender and offer him earth and water as tokens of submission, while those that resist are utterly destroyed. Holofernes carries out his mission with a vengeance. His massive army covers the distance from Nineveh to the plain of Bechteleth in northern Sicilia in just 3 days, cutting through the lands of Put and Lud, plundering the Racicites, and then after crossing the Euphrates River, moving through Mesopotamia to Sicilia and Damascus. By late spring, Holofernes has wreaked havoc on the Midianites and those living in the Damascus plain, terrifying the inhabitants of Mediterranean cities like Sidon, Tyre, Sur, Okina, Jamnia, Ozitus, and Ashkelon into surrendering unconditionally. Despite this surrender, Holofernes drafts their blessed men into his army, demolishes their sanctuaries, and cuts down their sacred poles, demanding that only Nebuchadnezzar can be worshipped as a god. Hearing of Holofernes' devastation and knowing he is consolidating forces in the Israelan Valley, the Israelites in Judea become deeply concerned for Jerusalem and their temple. Recently returned from exile in Babylonia, they have just rededicated their temple. High priest Joachim orders all Israelites to prepare for war, securing narrow mountain passes in towns like Bethulia and Bethemestim to block the Assyrian advance. Meanwhile, priests in Jerusalem continue offering sacrifices, and the Israelites, dressed in sackcloth and ashes, pray and fast, begging God to spare them and the temple. When Holofernes learns of the Israelites' resistance plans, he questions his staff about them. Achior, the commander of his Ammonite contingent, provides a brief history of the Israelites, detailing their origins in Chaldea, their religious expulsion, migration to Canaan, enslavement in Egypt, miraculous escape through the Red Sea, and their fluctuating fortunes based on their faithfulness to their God. He warns that unless the Israelites sin against their God, they cannot be defeated. Incensed by Achior's advice, Holofernes declares that Israel's God cannot save them because only Nebuchadnezzar is a god. He assures Achior that the Israelites will be destroyed and Achior with them, promising to deliver him into the hands of the Israelites to share their fate. When scouts from Bethulia find Achior bound at the bottom of their hill, they bring him to town. There, Uzziah, the chief magistrate, interrogates him. The townspeople commend Achior and Uzziah takes him in as a guest. Holofernes then deploys his army near Bethulia, occupying the surrounding hills and, on the advice of Edomite and Moabite commanders, seizing the town's water supply. After 34 days of siege, with their water and morale nearly gone, the Bethulians criticize their magistrates for not surrendering earlier. They argue that living as slaves is better than dying of thirst. Magistrate Uzziah proposes a compromise. If God does not save the town within 5 days, they will surrender. Satisfied, the people return to their tasks, albeit with low spirits. And this is where Judith, a widow of utmost beauty and charm, enters the scene. Judith, one of Bethulia's wisest and most devout citizens, was not present at this meeting. A wealthy and beautiful young woman, Judith is the daughter of Merari and widow of Manasseh. She lives a strict life, always fasting and wearing a sackcloth except on special occasions. Her piety earns her the respect of all. But that's not all. What happens next is shocking. Appalled by the compromise, Judith immediately summons the chief magistrates to her home and rebukes them for trying to force God's hand by setting a time limit for him to act. She insists that God cannot be threatened or cajoled. He acts according to his will. When the Israelites deserved their past suffering, they have remained faithful since their return from exile. Viewing their current predicament as a test rather than punishment, Judith urges the Bethulians to stand firm and block Holofernes' route to Jerusalem. Judith then revealed a secret plan, asking for permission to leave town with her trusted maid for several days. Desperate, the magistrates agreed. At the precise moment of the evening's incense offering in the Jerusalem temple, Judith prays to God, reminding him of how he helped his ancestor Simeon avenge his sister Dinah. She begs God to grant her the strength to carry out her plan against the arrogant Assyrians, sparing Jerusalem and showing the world that God alone protects Israel. Finishing her prayers, Judith bathes, put on her finest clothes and jewelry, and, with her maid carrying kosher provisions, leaves the town under the cover of darkness. They are soon discovered by an Assyrian patrol. Struck by her beauty, the soldiers escort her to Holofernes' camp. Holofernes tries to reassure Judith of her safety. She responds by politely insisting that, if he follows her advice, God will accomplish something for you. Flattering Holofernes, she echoes Achior's views that the Israelites cannot be defeated unless they sin. She fabricates a story that her people are about to commit sacrilege, promising to reveal the right moment to attack and offering to personally lead the way. Captivated by Judith's beauty and intelligence, Holofernes invites her to a party in his tent. Judith accepts and Bagos, Holofernes' major domo, that she will do whatever he desires. What she does next is shocking. After the guests leave, Holofernes, now drunk, lies down. Judith prays for strength, takes his sword, and decapitates him. Judith and her maid return to Bethulia with Holofernes' head. She displays it, proclaiming that the Lord has struck him down by the hand of a woman. Achior, seeing the head, faints. Impressed, he converts to Judaism. The next day, the Assyrians discover their leader's fate and panic, retreating in chaos. The Israelites defeat them, and the high priest Joachim praises Judith, saying she has brought glory to Israel. Judith composes a song of thanksgiving, celebrating their victory and God's protection. She dedicates all the booty to God, returns to Bethulia, and lives to the age of 105. Though many men seek her hand, she never remarries. She frees her maid and distributes her property to a family before she dies. Judith is buried beside her husband, and Israel remains unthreatened for a long time after her death. The story's main elements are God, power, sex, and death. It's no surprise that many people, even those not well versed with the Bible, know Judith as the woman who cut off the general's head. However, a closer look at the book reveals many errors and flaws, which might explain why it wasn't included in the Bible. From the start, there are inconsistencies in time, geography, and the identities of key people. Real places and people are mixed with fictional ones, such as the great Median king Arphaxad and Judith's hometown of Bethulia, which are mentioned nowhere else. From other biblical and historical sources, we know that Nebuchadnezzar was the king of Babylonians, not the Assyrians as stated in Judith. His capital was Babylon, not Nineveh, and he didn't destroy Nineveh. His father, Nabopolassar, did. Additionally, Ecbatana wasn't conquered until after Nebuchadnezzar by Cyrus the Great. The book also inaccurately portrays Nebuchadnezzar claiming to be a god, something no historical Assyrian, Babylonian, or Persian king did. The biggest anachronism is its historical setting. It depicts a post-exilic period, after the Jews returned and rebuilt the temple, while describing events that happened before the exile. Geographical errors are also present. For instance, the book claims Nebuchadnezzar destroyed Put and Lud before moving west, but these places are in Africa and Asia Minor, respectively. It also describes Nebuchadnezzar's army traveling 300 miles in 3 days, which is implausible. Some suggest that Judith was excluded from the canon because it was written in Greek rather than Hebrew. This view, however, is based on an outdated understanding of how the Hebrew Bible was canonized. Modern scholars believe that canonization was a gradual process, not a single event. There are also debates about the book's language. While some apocryphal books were originally thought to be written in Greek, recent findings show that many had Hebrew versions. Internal evidence suggests that Judith might have been composed in Hebrew. Another reason for its exclusion could be its late date. Scholars agree that, despite the story setting in the early Achaemenian period, the book was likely written in the late 2nd or early 1st century BCE during the Hasmonean period. This late date made it difficult, but not impossible for Judith to be included in the canon. Theological flaws may also have played a role. Achior, the Ammonite general, converts to Judaism, which contradicts Deuteronomy's prohibition against Ammonites joining the assembly of the Lord. Additionally, Judith's acceptance of Samaritans might have been problematic, given the hostility between Jews and Samaritans at the time. Some scholars suggest an anti-feminist reason for its exclusion, arguing that Judith's strong, independent character was too radical for the main-dominated society that decided the Hebrew canon. Judith was a fearless woman who chastised men, remained unmarried, and managed her own household, which might have been seen as threatening. Judith's morality is also questionable. When she is portrayed as a devout woman, she uses flattery, deception, and even murder to achieve her goals. These actions might have been seen as too morally ambiguous for a canonical book. Irony, a rhetorical device, permeates the book and might have led to misinterpretations. Judith's statements often have double meanings, understood differently by the characters and the readers. This complexity might have contributed to its exclusion from the canon, distinguishing it from other biblical books like Esther. Judith is a character full of irony. Though she's beautiful, wealthy, and has a perfect figure, she leads a life of strict self-denial, celibacy, prayer, and fasting. Despite being childless, she saves her people. Judith prays for a deceitful tongue and even asks Israel's merciful God for the strength to cut off a defenseless man's head. The ultimate irony is that she became famous not for her piety, but for her act of killing. Judith was a saint who committed murder for her people. These ironies can intrigue some readers, while repelling others. We don't know exactly why Judith was excluded from the Hebrew canon, while the godless Book of Esther was included. There is likely no single reason. Like in any election, voters have different reasons for their choices. Similarly, the sages of Israel and their followers decided against including Judith. Ultimately, the Jewish community chose not to include the Book of Judith in its sacred scriptures. Despite being excluded from the Hebrew canon, Judith remains a memorable figure, often depicted in art for her gruesome act. However, these artistic depictions often overlook the irony, humor, patriotism, and piety that make the Book of Judith so puzzling, intriguing, and appealing. If you've made it all the way to this part of the video, you